They say the moon does not cry when she is dimmed. They say she simply waits. But that night, the night Alpha Caelum Drake stood before every soul in Blackthorn Pack and looked at the girl with silver eyes and said, "I reject you, the moon did more than cry." She wept blood, and no one noticed, because they were all too busy laughing. Her name was Seraphine Voss, daughter of the Pack's lowest-ranked Omega, raised on scraps of dignity and the cold stone floors of the servants' quarters. She had no title, no bloodline worth speaking of, no warrior's mark, no healer's gift, nothing that the wolves of Blackthorn would call power. What she had always had, was the bond, the invisible, unbreakable thread that the moon goddess herself weaves between two souls before they are born. The mate bond, sacred, eternal, chosen not by rank, not by blood, not by a man's arrogance, but by something older than all of them combined. And that bond pointed directly at Caelum Drake, Alpha of Alphas, Lord of the Eastern Territories, the most powerful wolf in 500 years. And in front of 300 witnesses, his pack, his warriors, the visiting dignitaries from 3 rival clans, he looked at Seraphine Voss, and he smiled. Not with warmth, with pity. "I, Caelum Drake, Alpha of the Blackthorn Pack, Lord of the Eastern Territories, hereby reject you, Seraphine Voss, as my fated mate. I do this not with cruelty, but with kindness. You deserve a man of your own level. I deserve a mate worthy of my throne." He said it like he was doing her a favor. He said it like he was a god handing back a broken prayer. He said it, and then he extended his hand to the woman standing at his right. Lady Isadora Vane, golden-haired, high-born, eyes like cut emeralds and a smile that had been practiced in mirrors since childhood. The crowd roared its approval. And Seraphine stood there, with her second-hand dress and her bare feet and her silver eyes that had never once looked away from him. And she said nothing. She pressed one hand to her chest, felt the bond snap, felt it like a blade drawn slowly from between her ribs, felt her knees buckle, felt the tears try to come and swallow them back down. And then she turned, and she walked away, head high. She did not run. She did not beg. She did not scream. She simply left, and no one thought twice about it. But here is what no one in that hall knew. No one knew what Seraphine Voss truly was. No one knew what she had buried beneath years of silence and survival. And no one, not even fate itself, was prepared for what came next. Chapter 1. The girl they forgot to fear. Let us go back. Because every story that matters has a before. Seraphine Voss had been born during an eclipse. Her mother, Marin, a soft-spoken Omega who smelled of rain and dried lavender, had labored alone in the servants' wing of Blackthorn Keep while the rest of the pack celebrated the Harvest Moon Festival 2 floors above. No midwife, no elder, no blessing, just Marin and the shadows and the sound of the wolf pups howling at the darkened sky. When Seraphine entered the world, she did not cry. She opened her eyes, silver, impossibly silver, like moonlight trapped behind glass, and she stared at the ceiling as though she was reading something written there that no one else could see. Marin had pressed her to her chest and whispered, "You are going to frighten them one day, little ghost. But not yet. Not yet." She had been right on both counts. Growing up in Blackthorn Pack as an Omega's daughter was an exercise in invisibility. You learned quickly which tables to avoid, which hallways to disappear from when warriors passed, which names to answer to, and most of them were not your own. Girl. Fetch, child. That Voss thing. Seraphine had answered to all of them without flinching. Not because she was weak, but because she was patient. Because Marin had also whispered, In the quiet dark between one day and the next, patience is not weakness, Sarah. It is the sharpest weapon of all, sharper than any fang, sharper than any blade, because they never see it coming. She had believed her mother. Even after Marin died fever, the pack healer said, though Seraphine had always wondered she had kept believing it. She was 15 when she first sensed the bond. It was not a thunderclap, the way the stories described. It was more like a key turning in a lock she had not known was inside her. A click, a warmth that spread from her sternum outward. And then she looked up from the washing she was doing in the courtyard and she saw him across the training grounds. Caelum Drake, 17 years old, already broad-shouldered and burning with power, laughing at something one of his warriors said, his dark hair wet with exertion, his eyes when they flicked briefly in her direction the color of deep, winter dark water. He did not feel it, or if he did, he buried it immediately. She knew this because he looked away without pausing, without a flicker, without so much as a second glance, and Seraphine pressed her hand to her chest, felt the warmth of the bond hum quietly against her ribs, and thought, so this is how it begins. She was not naive enough to think it would be simple. She was not reckless enough to announce it. Instead, she watched. She learned. She waited. 3 years of watching Caelum Drake move through the world as though it owed him every inch of space it contained. 3 years of understanding, slowly and with aching clarity, exactly who her mate was and what he thought of girls like her. He was not cruel in the obvious way. He did not strike servants or humiliate Omegas for sport. He simply did not see them. They were furniture, fixtures, background elements in the grand portrait of his life. Seraphine was 18 when she finally allowed herself one vulnerability, one unguarded moment. It was midwinter, the halls quiet, and she had crossed paths with him in the corridor outside the great library. He had been carrying a stack of strategy maps. She had been carrying nothing. Their eyes had met, just for a second, and something had moved across his face, some flicker of recognition that was not recognition at all, just the bond straining toward its other half like a plant toward sunlight, and then his jaw had hardened and he had looked away and kept walking. She had stood in that corridor for a long time after he was gone. Then she had gone back to her room, sat on her stone-cold floor, and made a decision that would change the shape of everything that followed. She would stop waiting for him to see her. She would become something that could not be unseen. Chapter 2. What She Buried in the Dark. Narrator. Now we reveal the first layer. The listener needs to understand that Seraphine has been hiding something. Build this with atmosphere. This is where the dark fantasy element takes root. There are things that Blackthorn Pack does not speak of in polite company. The Voss bloodline is one of them. It is easy to dismiss an Omega's daughter, easy to see the worn dress and the quiet eyes and the servile posture and conclude there is nothing worth investigating beneath. But blood is blood, and blood has a long memory. What very few living souls knew what had been buried under rumor and deliberate misdirection for 2 generations was that Seraphine Voss had not always been an Omega of Blackthorn Pack. She had been born something else entirely, in a different place, under a different sky. She had been born in the Hollow Courts. Narrator. Let that name land. Pause after it. The Hollow Courts should sound ancient and dangerous. The Hollow Courts. Ancient territory. Neither fully wolf-kind nor fully fey. A borderland where the old magic breathed, and the veil between worlds ran thin as mothwing. A place where bloodlines did not simply carry traits, they carried power. Raw, untamable, terrifying power that the modern pack system had spent 3 centuries trying to classify, contain, and if necessary, destroy. Maren had fled the hollow courts when she was 20. She had fled because she was pregnant, and because the man who had fathered her child was not supposed to exist, not in any world that the pack councils acknowledged. He was a creature of the old blood, an eclipse-born. One of 7 individuals in recorded history who carried the full spectrum of the moon goddess's gifts without the limitation of a single form. He could be wolf, he could be shadow, he could be something else entirely. And he had loved Seraphine Voss with everything he was, and she had loved him back, and then the courts had demanded his return, and he had gone not willingly, but gone nonetheless. And Maren had run toward the nearest pack and buried herself so thoroughly in the life of an Omega that no one ever thought to look closer. She had taken every precaution, suppressed Seraphine's scent with herb compounds she brewed in secret, kept her silver eyes explained away as a rare but not unheard of Omega trait, made sure her daughter never shifted in front of anyone, never showed what she was. Because what Seraphine was, what she truly was beneath the second-hand dresses and the quiet patience and the carefully constructed invisibility, was the daughter of an eclipse-born, half wolf, half something older, and entirely, devastatingly, catastrophically powerful in ways that had been sleeping since the night of her birth. She had known since she was 12. Maren had told her, whispering it like a prayer or perhaps a warning. She had told her about the hollow courts, about her father, a man named Oren, who smelled of lightning and deep forest, and who had eyes the precise color of a new moon, absolute, encompassing darkness with a rim of cold silver. She had told Seraphine, "Your power will not come all at once. It will come in pieces. And when it starts to wake, you must not let anyone see, because if they see what you carry, they will try to take it, or they will try to end you. Those are the only 2 options they will offer." She had been right about that, too. The power had started moving the night she turned 18. Small things at first. Shadows bending toward her when she was still. Water in bowls shivering without cause. Her wolf, the animal part of her, restless and immense, in a way that the body of a servant girl had no business containing. And then the bond had fully locked in, and she had looked at Caelum Drake and felt that pull, and somewhere deep in her blood, in the ancient hollow quartz inheritance, she carried something, had recognized something in him, too. Something that had nothing to do with the mate bond. Something far, far older, but she had waited, as her mother had taught her. She had pressed it all down and kept her eyes low and moved through Blackthorn Pack like a ghost, holding her power like a bird holds a stone quietly, at great cost, ready to release it the moment the time was right. She had not expected the Alpha's choosing ceremony to be the end of her patience. She had not expected him to reject her in front of everyone she had ever known. She had not expected the stone to slip from the bird's grip, but it did. Chapter 3. The Night Shift. The world changed. She walked out of the great hall, and she did not stop walking, through the courtyard, through the northern gate, open for the night's celebrations, unguarded because no one would dare leave on a night when the Alpha had just proclaimed his future, through the tree line, into the forest that pressed against Blackthorn territory like a dark thought. The cold bit her through the thin dress. She didn't care. The bond's severing still pulsed in her chest like a wound that couldn't decide whether to close or to deepen. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and walked, one foot, then the other, the ancient rhythm of forward. It was only when she reached the old standing stones, 3 miles from the pack boundary, in a clearing that the wolves of Blackthorn avoided because their instincts told them, correctly, that something old lived there, that she stopped. She stood in the center of the stones, and for the first time in years, she let herself feel it. The grief hit like a tide. It was not only grief for Caleum. She had been honest enough with herself for years to know that what she'd felt for him was bond chemistry and longing, and the painful intimacy of watching someone from a distance, not love in its fullest form. No. The grief was for the version of herself she had protected for so long. The girl who had believed that patience had a reward, that waiting had a purpose, that the moon goddess who had chosen her for him had not simply made a cruel joke of her entire existence. She let herself cry, properly, silently, with her face tipped up to the sky and the blood-red moon above her, and the standing stones humming low around her like they were listening. And then something extraordinary happened. The moon answered narrator. This is the first major supernatural moment. Voice should drop to reverent. Something ancient and enormous is entering the story, not in words, in feeling. In light, it came down from the sky in a column, silver-white, thick as winter fog, warm in the way that deep things are warm, not with heat but with age. It fell on Seraphine like a hand placed on a shoulder. Like recognition, and inside that light, she heard something she had not heard since the night of her mother's death. A voice, low, genderless, everywhere at once. Daughter of the eclipse, daughter of the old blood, you have waited long enough. Seraphine's breath stopped. He called his cruelty kindness, the voice continued. He called his fear of you wisdom. He called his chosen replacement a solution. He is wrong on all three counts. But he will not understand this yet. Understanding requires consequence. And consequence, daughter, is your domain now. The light intensified. The standing stones blazed, every carved glyph on their ancient surfaces igniting in cold silver fire. And Seraphine felt the sleeping thing inside her blood wake up, not gently. Not like easing into warm water, like being struck by lightning from the inside out. She arched back, her hands flew open. Her silver eyes went entirely, completely white, no iris, no pupil. Just light. And the suppression her mother had built into her body over 18 years of careful herbcraft shattered like glass dropped from a height. The hollow quartz blood roared free. The wolf inside her. The one that had never properly shifted. The one she'd kept locked and quiet and small, reared up and expanded into something that the word wolf was barely adequate to contain. It was vast. It was silver-edged shadow and old lightning, and the pressure of 1,000 moons compressed into one living form. And then it settled, folded back into her. Not gone, never gone again, but contained within her now, intentionally, the way a sword is contained in a skilled hand. She came back to herself kneeling in the center of the stone circle, breathing hard. Dress torn at the shoulders where something had moved under her skin and needed room. Her hands were steady. Her eyes, when she raised them to the still glowing moon, were silver again. But not the pale, quiet silver of before. Deeper, colder. The silver of something that has been tested and found to contain more than expected. What am I? She whispered. The voice came one more time, fading now, curling away like smoke. You are the consequence he chose when he chose poorly. Go, Seraphine Voss. The hollow quartz have been waiting for you. And something there, someone there, has been waiting far longer. She rose to her feet. She turned away from Blackthorn territory. She walked into the forest that no wolf of that pack had entered in 300 years. And the darkness received her like a homecoming. Chapter 4. What the Alpha in the morning after the Alpha's choosing ceremony dawned gray and wrong. Caelum Drake woke from a dream he could not remember. Only the residue of it. Something silver and enormous and ancient that had stood at the edge of his sleep and watched him with eyes that made him feel, for the first time in his 21 years, genuinely small. He shook it off. He was Alpha. He did not do small. The first report reached him at breakfast. One of the servant girls had left in the night. Seraphine Voss, the Omeza's daughter, the one from the ceremony, was gone. No note, no word to anyone. The Northern Gates guards, embarrassed, reported they hadn't seen her leave, only noticed her absence when her room was found empty. His beta, Rowan, delivered this news with the careful tone of a man who had already calculated what expression his Alpha would want him to have. Shall we send a search party? Rowan asked. Caleum considered it for all of 2 seconds. No. He set down his cup. She made her choice. She's free to go wherever suits her. A pause. Make sure she hasn't taken anything that doesn't belong to her. Rowan noted, privately, that the Alpha's jaw had been very tight since he woke up. He noted also that the Alpha had not yet sent for Lady Isadora, which was unusual given that last night he had publicly named her his chosen consort. He noted these things and kept them entirely to himself. The second report came 3 days later, and this one, Caleum could not dismiss with 2 seconds of deliberation. One of his border scouts, a capable, fearless woman named Petra, who had run the northern border for 6 years without incident, came back from patrol with her hand shaking, and her gray wolf eyes blown wide, and a story that she told twice, because the first time she told it, everyone in the war room thought she was either lying or concussed. She had been at the edge of the forbidden forest, the old growth timber that pressed against the northern boundary, the place that smelled of old magic and bad decisions. She had been running the line, and she had seen something emerge from the tree line. A figure, she said, a woman, tall, moving like nothing moved, no wolf I've ever seen, nothing human, quiet, like sound stopped around her. Petra's jaw worked, her eyes were silver, like light through water, and her shadow, Alpha, her shadow did not match her. It stretched wrong, it moved on its own. Caleum's hand had stilled on the war table. She didn't cross the boundary, Petra continued. She stopped at the line, looked at me, and then she smiled, not a kind smile, not a threat exactly, more like, she knew something specific, something about, Petra faltered. I don't know how to explain it. It felt like being told a secret you weren't ready to know. And then, Caleum said, very quietly. Then she turned and went back into the forest. And where she'd been standing, Alpha, the grass was silver, like frost, but it wasn't cold. And in the center of where she'd stood there was a flower that doesn't grow in this territory. It doesn't grow anywhere I've ever seen. Black petals, silver center, smelling of nothing, of absence. Caleum sent scouts into the forbidden forest. They came back in less than an hour, which told him everything. The forbidden forest was 3 miles deep at minimum. They had not been able to enter it, not because of physical barrier, because every time they set foot past the tree line, they felt, Hadley, the lead scout, used the word witnessed. They felt witnessed, seen by something that had no interest in being seen in return. And then they felt the strong, undeniable certainty that they were very small, and the forest was very old, and they should not be there. Caleum stood in his war room for a long time after they left. He touched the left side of his chest where the severed mate bond had left. Not nothing, not absence, something stranger than nothing. Something that pulsed faint and irregular like a signal from very far away. He had told himself it was residual bond chemistry, normal, biological. It would fade. It had not faded, if anything, in the past 3 days. It had grown. Chapter 5. The hollow quartz were not what the rumors described. The rumors spoke of darkness and danger, and creatures that wore human faces badly, like masks that had been left in the rain. The rumors spoke of madness and disappearances, and the kind of magic that consumed its practitioners from the inside. The rumors were not entirely wrong, but they missed the most important thing. The hollow quartz were also breathtaking. The forest that bordered them, the forbidden forest of Blackthorn's geography, barely scratching the edge of what lay within, gave way after the first mile to something that defied the word forest, the way an ocean defies the word puddle. The trees here were ancient beyond measure, their bark silver white and carved with spiral patterns that pulsed with faint light, their canopy so dense that the sky was visible only in narrow ribbons of deep indigo above. But light existed here anyway. Came from the earth itself, from clusters of luminescent fungi, and from streams that ran with water so clear it looked like poured glass, and from flowers, the same black and silver flowers that had bloomed where Seraphine had stood, that dotted the forest floor like scattered stars. She had walked for a day and a half before she encountered her first inhabitant. He appeared without warning or preamble, simply stepped out from behind an ancient tree, as though he had always been standing there, and the tree had merely been his waiting room. He was tall, taller than any wolf she'd seen, but lean with it, built like the forest itself, all height and patience and hidden root systems. His hair was the color of deep shadow, his skin the warm bronze of someone who spent time in a sunlight that operated by different rules than the sunlight she knew. And his eyes were the color of a new moon, absolute darkness rimmed with cold silver light. Her breath stopped. You have your mother's mouth, he said, and my eyes. I wondered which you'd inherit. Seraphine stood very still. The power in her blood shifted like a tide responding to a moon. Oren, she said. Not a question. The blood knew. He inclined his head. Something moved in his expression. Ancient grief, managed over decades into something that merely ached rather than devastated. I have been watching for you since she died. The courts have ways of knowing these things. A pause. I could not come to you before. The compact I made with the Blackthorn boundary, it held me out. What compact? Your mother extracted it from me, before she fled. She loved you enough to keep me away until she was sure you were ready. She knew what you would become. She was afraid the courts would pull you toward them before you had enough of yourself to hold on to. He studied her with those moon-dark eyes. She was wise. She was always wiser than me. Seraphine felt something crack open in her chest. Not the bond, that was still a ghost H behind her ribs. Something else. Something that had been locked since the night she'd pressed her ear to her dying mother's chest and listened to the spaces between heartbeats. Why now? She managed. Why did the boundary release? Because you were released, Oren said simply. The rejection severed the bond. Yes. But it also severed the last external claim on your identity within that pack. You are no longer anyone's anything, by their own declaration. You belong only to yourself now. And yourself is considerable. The ghost of something that might have been a smile. Come. There is much to tell you, and something, that has been waiting a very long time to speak with you. She followed him. She did not hesitate. Because the hollow quartz were in her blood, and she could feel it. The way a river feels the sea. The pull of something ahead that was large and old. And inevitable. Chapter 6. The truth about the Bondaren took her to the heart of the hollow quartz. It was a city, of a kind. Ancient architecture that moved slowly on its own. Stone towers that breathed, bridges that adjusted their angle depending on who crossed them. Market structures and gathering halls and libraries. So large their contents had long since outpaced any single mind's capacity to catalog. Creatures that were neither fully one thing nor another moved through it. Wolf-blooded fae, shadow-touched shifters. Beings that had lived long enough to stop concerning themselves with classification. They looked at Seraphine as she passed. They looked at her eyes. They looked at the space behind her, the shadow that moved on its own schedule, and they stepped aside. Old instinct, old recognition. Oren brought her to a building at the quartz center. That was not a building so much as a place where the air was different, thicker, older. Shot through, with the faint silver luminescence that she was beginning to understand, was the visual signature of the moon goddess's direct influence. Inside, sitting with the absolute stillness of something that has been sitting for a very long time, was a woman not young, not old, both, neither. She had silver hair and closed eyes and hands resting palm up in her lap, and she was breathing so slowly that each breath was a small event unto itself. The oracle, Oren murmured beside Seraphine. She's been waiting for me? Seraphine whispered. For approximately 300 years. A beat of silence, and then the oracle's eyes opened. They were entirely silver, no white, no pupil, pure, unbroken silver, and they found Seraphine's face with the precision of a compass finding north. Sit, she said. Her voice had the quality of water that had been running over stone for centuries. There is much you do not yet understand about what was done to you last night, and most of what you think you understand is wrong. Seraphine sat. 5. The mate bond, the oracle began, is not what the packs teach. The packs teach that it is a gift. The moon goddess joining two souls for love. 5. For companionship, for the continuation of strong bloodlines. This is the simplified version. The version designed to be comfortable. And the real version? Seraphine asked. The real version is this. The moon goddess does not match souls randomly. She matches them by need, by cosmic architecture. Two souls are bonded when their union would create something the world requires. A balance, an ability, a correction. The bond is not a reward. It is an assignment. The oracle leaned forward. Her silver eyes caught the light and threw it back. Your assignment, yours and Caelum Drake's, was not romantic. Or, rather, it was romantic only as a vehicle for something larger. You two were bonded because the world is approaching an imbalance. An ancient darkness is pressing at the seams of the veil between worlds. The veil that the hollow quartz have guarded for 3 centuries. It requires 2 things to remain stable. The full power of an eclipse-born heir, and the grounding force of an alpha who carries the old blood on the wolf side. Separately, neither of you is sufficient. Together, you are the lock. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. He rejected me, Seraphine said very carefully. Yes, which means the lock is currently open, the oracle said. The veil is destabilizing. Slowly, it will take months, not days. But it is already beginning. The eclipse storms, the strange howlings at the boundary, things pressing at the seams. A pause. He called his rejection kindness. He was not being kind, he was being afraid. But fear, when it acts, does not ask permission of the consequences it creates. Seraphine was quiet for a long time. Can it be fixed? She finally asked. Without him? The oracle's silver eyes held something that might have been sorrow. Not fully. Your power unlocked now as it is. 5 can hold the veil stable for a time. You can buy months, perhaps a year. But without the bond reformed, without both halves of the lock engaged, the darkness will eventually come through. Another silence. 5 and if he won't come? Seraphine said. Quiet, careful. The question of a woman who has already decided her own answer but wants to hear the full shape of the problem first. Then the hollow quartz will fall first, the oracle said. Then the borderlands. Then the pack territories. Then everything. In that order. Seraphine pressed her palm flat against her sternum, against the ghost of the severed bond, against the pulsing, complicated truth that it was not over, had never simply been about her and one arrogant alpha and a public humiliation in a great hall, had always been larger than that, always. Tell me, she said to the oracle, everything. Chapter 7. The darkness at the seams. 3 weeks after Seraphine walked into the forbidden forest, the dead began appearing at the Blackthorn boundary, not pack members, not wolves. Things that had no name in any catalog Caleum scholars could find. Creatures that seemed assembled from darkness and intent, that left no tracks, only scorch marks where they had stood. They did not attack. They simply appeared at the boundary line in the pre-dawn hours and stood there, watching the pack's territory with hollow eye sockets, and then dissolved when the sun fully rose in the first week. 3 sightings. Second week, 11. Third week, they stopped leaving at sunrise. Pack members had begun reporting nightmares of the same precise configuration. A darkness pressing at a door with no handle, a door that was slowly giving way under the weight of something on the other side. They woke from these dreams with frost on their pillowcases even in mid-autumn warmth. The pack's healer had no explanation. The pack's elder had too many explanations, all of them predating the current generation by at least 2 centuries, and she delivered them in the grim, steady tones of someone who had hoped very hard not to be right, and was now resigned to being exactly right. The veil, Elder Cora said to Caleum in his war room, while outside the window the sunset went strange colors it had no business going. 5 The boundary between this world and the dark realms beyond the hollow quartz. It is fracturing. Why now? Caleum asked. He was very still. He had been very still for 3 weeks. Elder Cora looked at him for a long time. The way very old people look at very young people who have done something irreversible and haven't yet fully comprehended the shape of it. Alpha, she said, I am going to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, not the answer you would prefer to give. Ask. The girl you rejected, Seraphine Voss, what did you know about her bloodline? Caleum's jaw tightened. She was an Omega's daughter. No notable bloodline. No rank. No, what did you know? Cora repeated with an emphasis that silenced him. Before you decided what you preferred to believe. Did your wolf know something different? Did the bond tell you something you chose to override? The silence in the room was very long. My wolf, Caleum said eventually. Each word chosen with the care of someone handling broken glass was insistent. About the bond. More insistent than I have ever heard of a mate bond being. I attributed it to chemistry. Biology. I thought if I allowed myself to feel it fully, it would compromise my judgment. And did you, Cora said, feel anything in the bond beyond normal mate pull? Anything that suggested she was significant in a way that exceeded the personal. Caleum stood up from the war table, walked to the window, looked at the wrongly colored sunset. I felt, he said quietly, like she was a door, like if I acknowledged the bond, I was walking through a door, and the room on the other side was vast, incomprehensible. Like, I was not ready for the scale of what was there. And so you closed the door. I rejected the bond. Yes. And now the door is closed, Cora said. But the room on the other side still exists. And what lives in it is pressing at the frame. Caleum turned from the window. Tell me what I need to know. You need to know, Cora said. That Seraphine Voss is not an Omega's forgettable daughter. She is the heir of the hollow quartz. The child of an eclipse born. And she is the other half of the only lock that stands between this world and what is coming. A pause. 5. And you need to know that by rejecting her publicly, you did not simply wound her pride. You initiated the unraveling of the most important protective bond this world has seen in 300 years. Another pause. This one longer. And you called it kindness, the elder said. The word fell into the room and lay there. What do I do? Caleum asked. His voice had lost something. The performance of confidence that was usually so thoroughly integrated into his tone that you couldn't find the seam between the real thing and the habit of it. You go to her, Cora said. And you pray, to whatever old powers will still hear an alpha who has been profoundly foolish, that she is willing to listen. Chapter 8. He comes to the forest. Caelum Drake, Alpha of the Eastern Territories, Lord of Blackthorn Pack, walked to the edge of the forbidden forest at dawn with no warriors and no strategy. He had considered bringing both. He had also considered that arriving at the domain of an eclipse-born heir with a war party might constitute an unambiguous communication of the wrong kind, so he came alone. The forest received him differently than it had received his scouts. It did not push him back with the feeling of being witnessed. It let him in, quietly, without ceremony, as though it had been expecting him, and found the whole thing somewhat tedious. He walked for an hour. The old-growth timber closed around him. The light changed quality. The air changed weight. He was not afraid. He was an alpha. Fear was something he processed differently than most, routed through anger and forward momentum. But he was humbled, and that was something he had less practice with. The black and silver flowers were everywhere. They watched him pass, in the way plants do not usually watch things. He was not prepared for the courts themselves. No description could have prepared him. Elder Cora had tried, and he had listened with the part of his brain that files things under notable rather than real. But standing at the edge of that city, feeling the old power of it move through the air like weather, he understood for the first time in his life that the world he had been governing was a very small corner of something enormous. A man appeared. Tall, shadow-dark hair, eyes like a new moon. Caleum's wolf went very quiet, not in submission, in the particular stillness of a predator who has just understood that it is also prey. Orin, Caleum said, because Elder Cora had given him names. Alpha, Orin replied. The word in his mouth was not deference, it was taxonomy. A label applied without particular regard for the power it usually implied. I need to speak with Seraphine, I know. Orin studied him with those unreadable moon-dark eyes. The question is whether she needs to speak with you. The veil, yes. Orin's tone did not change. We are aware of the veil. We have been managing the fractures since the night of your rejection. My daughter has been pouring herself into the stabilization process for 3 weeks. She has not slept. She has barely eaten. She is holding an unraveling world in her hands while you have been in your war room being startled by the consequences of a decision you made in approximately 10 seconds. Caleum absorbed this. I need to see her, he said. Not a demand, another first. Please. The word sat strangely in his mouth. He wasn't certain the last time he'd used it. Orin regarded him for a long moment. She will decide, he said finally. Come. They found her at the edge of a vast silver pool at the court's eastern boundary, the point closest to the fracturing veil. She was standing ankle-deep in the water with her arms extended, and her palms up, and her silver eyes wide open and blazing with light. And around her, the water churned in slow, deliberate patterns as she channeled power into the boundary that was trying to hold. She looked like nothing Caelum Drake had ever seen. She looked like the door he had refused to open, standing open now without his permission. And the room behind it was exactly as vast as he had feared, exactly as incomprehensible. And also, and this was the part that did something complicated to his chest, exactly as beautiful. She knew he was there, he was certain of it. The silver eyes didn't move from the veil's fracture points, but something in her posture changed, tightened and released, tightened and released. The physical tell of someone managing an emotion by reminding themselves that their hands are already full. He stood at the water's edge and waited. Eventually, she let her arms lower. The power receded to a low hum. She turned to look at him. Her face was exhausted. 3 weeks of near-constant effort had cut new shadows under her eyes. But her gaze when it found him was not exhausted at all. It was clear and still and precise, and it held him with the same quality as the forest had held him walking in. Like being seen by something that had no interest in being seen in return. You came, she said, neutral, a statement without emotional direction. I came, he said. He stopped, tried again. I was wrong. The silence between them was very long. I know, she said finally, and then, 5 quietly, that's not actually why I'm angry at you. Then tell me why. Her silver eyes held his. I'm angry because you looked at me, and you chose to see what was convenient to see. I was standing in front of you for 3 years. 3 years of watching you move through the world and never once. She stopped. Steadied. The bond told you something. Your wolf told you something. And you filed it under inconvenient and moved on. You didn't reject me because I was low-ranked. You rejected me because I was too much and you didn't want to deal with the size of it. Caleum was quiet. Say something that is true, she said. He looked at her, at the silver eyes, and the exhausted shadows, and the water still rippling around her ankles, and the entire weight of a world she'd been holding for 3 weeks with no one to help. You were right, he said. I was afraid. I looked at the bond, and I felt what was in it, what you were, and I was afraid of the responsibility and the scale, and the fact that I didn't understand it, and I chose the comfortable option, and I put a name on my cowardice that I could live with. A pause. I called it kindness, he said, because that was the only version of the story where I wasn't the one who ran. Chapter 9. The thing that comes through. They had been talking for an hour when the veil screamed. There was no other word for it. A sound that came not through the air but through the ground, through the water, through the chest. A tearing, high-pitched structural cry that sent every creature in the hollow courts running for cover and brought Seraphine spinning back to the eastern pool, with her hands already raised and her power already moving. The fracture, she said. And her voice had lost all trace of the conversation they'd been having. It's accelerating. Something is pushing from the other side. Caleum was at her side without deciding to be. The pool's water had gone black. Not metaphorically. Literally, completely, suddenly black, as though ink had been poured into it from below. And at the center, a point of darkness was expanding. A tear in the veil, edges ragged. The darkness on the other side of it pressing through with the slow, inevitable weight of something that has been patient for a very long time. What comes through it? Caleum said. 5. The unwritten. Seraphine's voice was strained now. She was pouring power into the edges of the tear, trying to hold it, trying to slow it. My 5 entities, from before the goddess made the world as it is. They were here first. They want to be here again. What does your power do to them? Delays them, pushes them back temporarily. But without both halves of the bond, without the lock fully engaged, her jaw tightened with effort. I can't close it. I can only slow it. Caleum looked at the tear, looked at her, felt the severed bond in his chest, that pulse that had refused to fully die, and understood. With the total clarity that only arrives when the stakes have become concrete and immediate, what he needed to do. Seraphine. Not now. Seraphine, look at me. She turned her head, silver eyes meeting his dark water ones, both of them blazing. His with the alpha power that ran in a cleaner, pack-rooted form, Whoop's with the old hollow quartz fire that had no clean form at all. I am asking, he said, to reform the bond. Not because the world requires it, though it does. He paused, found the true thing, said the true thing, for possibly the first time in his life without calculating its effect first. Because I have spent 3 weeks feeling the ghost of what I cut away, and I know now that it was never small. It was never something I could have looked at and turned away from with integrity. I ran. I am not running anymore. Her eyes searched his. You don't get to decide that for both of us, she said. I know, I'm asking. The tear in the veil pulsed. Something on the other side pressed forward, a hand, massive and dark, and without specific form, reaching through the gap. Seraphine looked at it, looked at him, looked at the ghost of the bond between them, which was not. She could feel it now, as severed as she'd thought. Damaged, yes. Cut. But mate bonds are not simple threads, they are roots, and roots when damaged send new growth. You hurt me, she said. Yes, he said. I know. You don't get to do it again. No, I don't. She studied him for one more second. Then she extended her hand, he took it. The bond reformed the way lightning chooses a path. Not gradually, not gently, but with the absolute structural certainty of 2 things that were always going to connect. It hit them both like an internal earthquake. Caleum's wolf erupted, not in distress but in recognition, the raw tidal recognition of something finding its anchor. Seraphine's hollow quartz, blood flared silver white, the eclipse power roaring up and out and forward. They did not have to do anything else. The bond, reformed and whole and blazing with 3 weeks of compressed potential energy, did it for them. The light from them was visible from half a mile away. Every creature in the hollow courts saw it. Every wolf at the Blackthorn boundary felt it. A wave of something warm and enormous rolling out from the north. Something that reached into the fractures and sealed them the way heat seals wax. Every borderland creature that had been pressing at the veil's seams felt the lock engage and pulled back. Not by force, but by the simple physics of a door that is no longer available to them. The tear in the pool closed, the water went silver. The scream of the veil ceased. And in the silence that followed, a silence that had a different quality than before. The quality of something that has been set right. Seraphine and Caleum stood at the pool's edge with their hands still joined, and the bond between them blazing with a warmth that neither of them had expected to feel like home. Chapter 10. Consequence. The consequences of that night moved in multiple directions simultaneously. In Blackthorn Pack, the dark creatures at the boundary dissolved between one breath and the next, leaving nothing behind but those silver-black flowers scattered at the tree line. The nightmares stopped. The frost on pillowcases melted. The sunset. The next evening was the correct colors. Elder Cora stood at the border and looked at the flowers, and allowed herself, privately, to exhale. Lady Isadora Vane, whose ascent to Alpha Consort had been one of the few things going smoothly in 3 weeks of general strangeness, received word from Rowan, careful, tactful, deeply apologetic Rowan, that the Alpha's circumstances had significantly changed. Isadora was not a woman who processed disappointment quietly, but she was a woman who processed it intelligently. And after the first hour of fury, and the second hour of calculation, she arrived at the understanding that she had been involved in something she hadn't been fully informed about, and that information asymmetry had disadvantaged her along with everyone else. She left Blackthorn territory with her dignity intact, which was more than most people managed in her position. In the hollow courts, Oren, who had watched his daughter pour herself into the veil's stabilization for 3 weeks, with the powerless anguish of a parent whose child is in danger, and whose range of intervention is limited, spent a very long time looking at the pool after it went silver. Then he looked at the Alpha who had caused 3 weeks of near catastrophe by being afraid of a door. "You will not hurt her again," Oren said. It was not a threat. It had the quality of a statement of physics, a description of how reality was structured rather than a warning about how it might be restructured. "No," Caleum said, simply, "I won't." Oren nodded, once, and then he left them there by the silver pool and did not look back. And then there was the question of Seraphine and Caleum themselves. They stood at the pool's edge as the courts settled around them, and the bond hummed between them. No longer a wound, not yet fully a home. But something in between. Something new and fragile and enormous that required care, and Seraphine said, "I am not moving back to Blackthorn." "I know," Caleum said. I belong here too. I need to be here. The courts need." "I know." She looked at him. "You know, I have a pack," he said. "You have a courts. We have a bond and a veil to maintain, and apparently the fate of the entire world sitting on our combined ability to not make each other miserable. I think we figure out the geography together. I think we stop making decisions unilaterally." "That," Seraphine said after a moment, "is the most sensible thing I have heard you say." "It may be the most sensible thing I've said to date," he admitted. "I'm told I have room for improvement." Something moved in her expression. Not forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness was not a single moment. It was a practice, and they both understood this, but something adjacent to it. Something that was willing to begin. She turned back to the pool. Silver water. Silver reflections. The veil on the other side of the world's thin places, whole and tended. "You should know," she said. That the oracle told me this would happen. All of it. The rejection, the walking out, the courts, the veil, the bond breaking and reforming. She paused. She said it was the only path through. That if you had simply accepted me that night, at the ceremony, without the reckoning, without both of us having to face the full truth of who we are and what we're capable of, the bond would have been formed, but it would not have been strong enough. It would have held the veil, but not by much. Caleum was quiet. "Fate," she continued, "is not kind. It is efficient. It needed you to reject me so that I would leave and unlock my power and come into my inheritance. It needed you to face the consequences so that you would stop being afraid of the size of this." She glanced at him sidelong. It used your cowardice as a tool. And you? He said. What did it use you for? Her smile, when it came, was small and complicated and entirely real. It used me as a lesson. What fate called it months past, the world did not end. This is in many ways the most important thing to note, the most straightforward evidence that something had gone right. Seraphine Voss became Seraphine of the Hollow Courts, not by anyone's grant or decree, by blood right, by the simple fact that she was Orin's daughter, and the power in her veins was the court's own power. And when she stood at the eastern pool and opened her hands, the veil responded to her the way the tide responds to the moon. Not because it was asked to, but because the relationship was structural. She also became, over the slow and complicated and sometimes difficult months of reconstruction, something to Caelum Drake that she had never expected to become, not his subject, not his property, not even, quite. His mate in the simple pack-tail sense of two wolves settling into a territory together. She became his equal, his anchor, the door he had been afraid of, which he walked through now, not with the giddy abandon of a man who has forgotten why he was afraid, but with the deliberate courage of a man who remembers exactly why, and opens the door anyway. He spent half his time in the Hollow Courts. She spent half her time in Blackthorn territory. Not as an Omega's daughter, not with bare feet and second-hand dresses, but as herself, which turned out to be a considerably more formidable thing than Blackthorn Pack had any prior framework for. The pack adjusted. People often do. When the alternative is the end of the world, the dark creatures did not return. The veil held. The oracle in her ancient hall opened her silver eyes one morning, looked at the luminescent air of the courts, and smiled with the satisfaction of something that has been right for a very long time and only now has proof. Orin, for his part, learned to tolerate Caelum Drake. This is not as small an achievement as it sounds. Coming from a man who had watched his daughter's mate bond her to an alpha who rejected her publicly and called it kindness. He learned to tolerate him the day he watched Caleum, standing at the veil's boundary during a minor fracture event, step in front of Seraphine, instinctive, uncalculated, the pure wolf response, and pour his own alpha power into the breach without being asked. He held it for 11 minutes, past his body's reasonable tolerance, until Seraphine could get her hands into position to reinforce. He didn't mention it after. Didn't catalog it as heroisms, just rolled his shoulders and said, "Together, then." And Seraphine looked at him with those deep silver eyes that held entire courts full of old light and said, "Together, then." He had called his rejection kindness. He had wrapped his cowardice in the language of consideration. He had stood before 300 witnesses and performed a kind of mercy that was actually a kind of devastation. And fate. The moon goddess, the old powers, whatever name you prefer to give to the vast architecture of how things must unfold, had looked at what he'd done. And fate had called it something else. Fate had called it the beginning, because sometimes the wound is the door. Sometimes the rejection is the road. Sometimes the public humiliation and the cold walk through the dark forest and the terrifying, beautiful unraveling of everything you thought you were. Sometimes all of that is not the tragedy. Sometimes all of that is the invitation. 5. To the version of yourself that has been waiting, in the dark, holding everything quietly. Knowing. The way deep things know that the moment will come, that the patience will prove itself, that the door will open, that the world, 5, however it breaks, can be held. Seraphine Voss stood at the eastern pool of the Hollow Courts on the night of the winter solstice, 1 year and 3 months after the night she had been rejected in front of 300 witnesses, and she looked at the veil, whole, humming, stable, and she felt the bond warm and present and enormous in her chest. She felt Caleum standing behind her before he arrived. The bond was like that now. He stood beside her at the pool's edge. He did not speak. Neither did she. There was nothing that needed saying in the way that words can say things. Above them, the moon, full tonight, silver white and enormous, cast their reflections into the pool's still surface, his dark, hers silver, overlapping at the edges. The veil shimmered once, like a curtain in a gentle wind, like something on the other side acknowledging the watch. Seraphine raised her palm toward it. "Still holding," she said quietly. "Still holding," the veil answered, not in words, in the warm, low hum of a stable world, and that was enough. That was more than enough, that was everything. And so, beloved listener, there you have it, the Alpha who called his rejection kindness, the girl who swallowed the wound and walked into the dark, the father who waited 300 years, the world that was nearly lost to a man's fear and a woman's in silence, and saved by neither of those things, saved by the reckoning that followed, by the consequence, by what happens when the moon goddess stops being polite and starts being strategic. There is something I want you to sit with as this story settles into you. How often do we call our cowardice something more comfortable? How often do we name our fear as wisdom, our avoidance as kindness, our unwillingness to face the full size of something as sensible, responsible restraint? Caelum Drake did not think he was running. He genuinely believed, or at least, he performed believing, that rejecting Seraphine was the merciful, pragmatic, correct thing to do. This is the most dangerous kind of wrong, the kind that arrives wearing the clothes of right. And Seraphine, who spent years being patient, being invisible, being the quiet shape in the background of someone else's story, had to be broken open before she could become what she always was. That, too, is a kind of truth that cuts, because we should not have to be broken to become ourselves. And yet the breaking happens. And what matters, what the story always comes back to, is what we do in the dark afterward. Whether we press our hands to our chests and walk, head high, into the forest, toward the version of ourselves that has been waiting. This is why we tell these stories. Not because rejection is secretly a gift, and suffering is secretly a blessing, and pain is secretly love wearing a mask, but because in the telling, we find the map for what to do when those things arrive regardless. Walk, don't run, head high. The dark has a door on the other side. The hollow courts are waiting. If this story moved something in you, if Seraphine's silver eyes burned somewhere behind yours, if you felt Caleum's reckoning in your own chest, if the hollow courts called to something you haven't quite named yet, then tell me in the comments. Tell me which moment stopped your breath. Tell me which line you had to pause on. Tell me if you have your own story of a door someone else tried to close. And tell me, because I genuinely want to know, whether you think Caleum deserved his second chance, or whether Seraphine should have let the world figure it out on its own. I'll be in the comments. I read everyone. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, dark, real, fantastical, emotionally honest, the kind that sits with you for days, and makes you rethink something you thought was simple, then subscribe. Stay. There are more doors to walk through. The moon is watching, she always is.